Okay, continuing in chapter 10, we're going to be talking about part 3, which are peer relationships. Now, peers become super important during this section of development, middle childhood. They are influences in socialization. So they help us. When we're small, we learn from our parents, and they provide, but they can only provide our experience and our understanding of our relationships with adults. Once we get a little bit older and are able to have peers, interact with peers on a more regular basis, they provide us with relationships to those in our own generation. They help us learn to cooperate. They help us learn how to relate to leaders, and they help us learn how to cope with aggressive and impulsive behaviors. They also help us understand and figure things out. They can provide a sounding board. We can compare our feelings and emotions with our peers. We can compare experiences, and we can help each other. Friends help each other understand that we're going through the same thing, that we're not alone, that we understand what is happening. Now, two of the big things that happen when we have peers and in this age group is acceptance and rejection. So when we're looking at acceptance or rejection, if we look at the popular kids, kids who tend to be accepted more readily, they do tend to be attractive. They tend to be good at academics or sports, and they tend to be mature for their age. These are some of the qualities that the more popular children have. Now, attractiveness, when it comes to popularity, is more important for girls than it is for boys. Popular children socially are friendly, sometimes nurturing, cooperative, helpful, and socially skillful, and they also have high self-esteem. On counter to that, children who display behavioral problems or learning problems are seen as aggressive and who are disruptive are more likely to be rejected by their peers. These rejected kids then tend to remain on the fringes instead of changing their behaviors or trying to change in order to conform to the group. Now, acceptance. Let's focus on that and the development of friendships. Between the ages of 8 and 11, friendship becomes super important in terms of how friends can help meet each other's needs and possess desirable traits. Typically, we pick friends who are similar to us, similar in behavior, similar in personality. Are they trustworthy? Do we have a mutual understanding with them? Are we comfortable disclosing personal information with them? These are the kinds of things that characterize relationships, not only in middle childhood as they start to develop and become more important, but also as we develop and grow into adulthood. These same kinds of ideas apply to when we're developing friendships. Now, when we look at friends versus acquaintances, when we're looking at friends, we're usually more talkative with them, we're more expressive with them, we're more relaxed, mutually responsive than to just how we would be with people that are just acquaintances. We do act differently when it comes to friends than we do when it comes to acquaintances. At this time, boys are still likely to more play in larger groups. Girls, however, will have around 4 best friends by when they're 9 years old. Now, Mr. Selman, again, we looked at him before a little bit earlier when we were talking about cognitive development. He also has identified the stages of children's changing concepts of friendship. So how children think about friendship during this time and during childhood. So if we look here, Selman, now this was back in 1980, he developed these 5 stages, just like he had 5 before, 5 here as well, from 0 to 4, and we can see that they start around age 3 and go to age 12 and above. So the first stage is momentary, physical interaction. So the children are still relatively egocentric. We have a hard time understanding the world beyond our own. Um, a friend is someone who likes to play with the same toys and who may live nearby, and that's how we typically think of friends. Um, the second stage he called one-way assistant. These are children 5 to 9. Children become less egocentric, but they still see the friend as someone who does what they want to do, so they enjoy similar activities. Fair weather cooperation, stage 3, ages 7 to 12. This is where we get to be a little less egocentric, so we understand and we do things for one another, but we're still focused on self-interest, doing what we want, getting what we want, playing how we want to play. Stage 3, ages 10 to 15. This is where we develop some intimacy and some mutual sharing. So this is where the focus changes to the actual relationship and how that relationship is beneficial for both parties, providing support over a long period of time. And then ages 12 and above, stage 4, the autonomous and interdependence. This is where adults, adolescents, and children understands that friendships do grow and change, just like people. And they may need different friends to satisfy different needs. So your best friend in freshman year may not be enough by the time you graduate high school, or even get a little bit older. Not to say that you wouldn't still be friends with that person, but relationships change and needs change, and the people that fulfilled some roles before can no longer fulfill the roles that we need them to fulfill, and vice versa. We may have fulfilled a role for someone that we're not able to do that any longer or in the same way. Now, this isn't a section in your book. It is a page dedicated to it, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about bullying. And bullying has become an epidemic of late. And it is everywhere. Back in the day, way back in the day, used to be just on the playground and in school, and maybe if you were hanging out with kids in the neighborhood. Now it's everywhere all the time, thanks to a relatively new phenomenon known as cyberbullying, where we're using our electronics and technology to transmit threats and taunts 24/7. And as this phenomena has increased, so has the rate of suicide among this particular group of kids, middle schoolers. And one of the reasons they think this, why suicide may be even more prevalent as a result of bullying for this group, is because these kids are still cognitively developing. They're still trying to figure out who they are. They don't have a strong sense of self. They don't know how necessarily to stand up for themselves and defend themselves because they don't know who they are. Now, statistically, boys are more likely to be bullies than girls are, but that's not to say girls don't engage in bullying. And if we look at it statistically, it's estimated that almost half, or at least half, of middle school students in the United States have been exposed to bullying. Now, if we look at bullies a little bit, they do have some things in common. Now, not all bullies are going to fit into these descriptive categories, but their achievement does tend to be lower than average. And so they may be looking for peer approval in some other way than academics. They are more likely to come from homes where the SES status is lower and where parental violence is an issue. They're more often associated with diagnoses of conduct disorder, ADHD, and oppositional defiant disorder. As far as the victims go, victims often report being anxious and depressed. And often they'll find their peers avoiding them because those peers don't want to become victims of the bullies as well, so they avoid getting involved. I highly recommend you take a look at this section in your book. It has some interesting and kind of sad, but also interesting stories about some kids who felt the effects of bullying, and even some folks that are popular in our culture. So give it a read.